Praise to you, Lord, King of eternal glory. Praise to you, Lord, King of eternal glory. I give you a new commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. Praise to you, Lord, King of eternal glory.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put into the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered, "You do not know now what I am doing, but later you will understand." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "One who has bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you." For he knew who was to betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." After he had washed their feet, put on his robe, and returned to the table, Jesus said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example, that you also should do as I have done to you." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
In the introduction to his reflections on the Passion, Charles Hugo Doyle writes that love moves and governs all things. If your love is for the world, you are its slave. If your love is for Christ, you are set free from the bondage, from the attachment and addiction to sin, allowing his love to transform you to his image. Tonight, in the Mass of the Lord's Supper, we remember how our Lord, having loved his own who were in the world, loved them to the end. No doubt his incarnation, his teachings, his miracles and signs were all motivated by love for his own, for us. How can they not be? He is love incarnate. Yet we are reminded in this one statement made by the evangelist St. John of how far that love, divine love, is willing to go. To the end. To the utmost degree. To the last moment of his life, to the shedding of his blood in agony. All this being brought to conclusion with his suffering and death on a cross. To the end. Consummatum est. It is finished. On this night, our Lord Jesus Christ gave us the Eucharist as a memorial of his suffering and death, a memorial of his presence and enduring passion, of his love that goes to the end. This is the love that transforms. It transforms the cross from an instrument of torture and killing into an image of self-gift, of unconditional love. The self-giving of Christ on the cross is his Passover, his passage to the glory of God, from this world to the Father. It is a passage of transformation. Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI teaches us in his encyclical Deus Caritas Est, God is Love, that through the Eucharist we are drawn into our Savior's very act of self-oblation. We enter into the very dynamic of his self-giving. When we participate in the Eucharist, we too can be transformed. A transformation of our own lowly body in the pattern of his own glorious body. A transformation to his image. The inexhaustible richness of the sacrament of the Eucharist is expressed in the various names we give it, steeped richly in ancient Jewish rituals. One name that we give to the Eucharist is Holy Communion, derived from the Greek word koinonia, which comes from the Jewish ritual, the Chaburah, a fellowship shared by members of God's covenant family. But how could God share in a communion with unworthy, sinful human beings? He would lower himself down, loving us to the end, in order to transform us and lift us up to be sharers in his divine nature. A communion, a sharing in the blood of Christ. This passage of transformation begins with being purified. This purification can be seen in the symbolic gesture of our Lord washing the feet of his disciples. Now let's be clear. There is no glory in washing dirty, stinky feet. Historically, washing feet was the lowest job in the household, reserved for the lowliest slave. The chore that everyone wanted to avoid. To our standard, it is degrading. A king would never wash one of his subjects' feet, nor would a master wash his servants' feet. Yet out of love for his own, our Lord lowers himself down, takes the form of a slave, with a mighty hand and outstretched arm, and washes the disciples' feet. The question here is, will we allow him to wash our feet? Will we allow him to purify us? Peter resists. He struggles to allow the Lord to kneel before him, to serve him so humbly, to love him to the end. Our sinfulness, our pride, our addictions to glory, honor, and power get in the way, which cause us an interior resistance to divine love. However, our Lord is clear. Unless we allow him to purify us, unless we allow him to love us with that love to the end, we can have no part in him. We cannot experience the passage of transformation into his image. We cannot share in the communion of his own blood. Tonight, we come to reflect on the reality that God has loved us first. He initiates. He acts regardless of whether we receive it or not. And he does not stop loving us. If we choose to receive that love, then we must love others as he has loved us to the end. Eucharistic communion includes the reality both of being loved and of loving others in turn. Participating in our Lord's Passover, his act of self-giving, calls us to make a gift of ourselves to transform the world through our acts of mercy and charity. In a time of self-isolation, maybe take the time following this Mass to wash the feet of each other in your household, in your family. And since we cannot partake physically in the communion which Christ shares, we can partake spiritually. Finally, pray for an increase in vocations to the priesthood, so that the Lord, who loves us to the end, makes himself obedient to the ordained men in the priesthood to continually offer the Eucharistic sacrifice. Whether people are here or not, the sacrifice is being offered for you. Such is the wonder of God's love, his love to the end, that he gathers to this feast those who are far apart and brings together in unity of faith us who are physically separated from each other. I will leave you with this exhortation given by St. Teresa of Calcutta. Keep giving Jesus to your people, not by words, but by your example. By your being in love with Jesus, by radiating his holiness, and spreading his fragrance of love everywhere you go.